In this video, you'll learn how to apply drop shadows. There's a couple of different techniques I'd like to show you. The first is the drop shadow directly as a layer effect. And the second one will use a trick where we set fill to 0%. So let's go ahead and open the Kitchen 9 PSD file and begin by adding a drop shadow to the kitchen island. Scroll down in the layers list and locate the island layer and select it. Double-click on the word Effects to open the Layer Style dialog box. Click on the word Drop Shadow. You can adjust the distance and the size here interactively, and you can also adjust the angle that the drop shadow is cast in. But I find that the most flexible way is simply to pull the cursor over here on the screen and move the drop shadow where you want it. This is going to automatically alter the angle and distance for you. You can then soften the shadow by increasing the size. This gives a sense of depth to the drawing, because it gives us an indication of a three-dimensionality in this kitchen. This island is an object that casts a shadow. The farther the shadow is away, the taller the object is. You can decrease the intensity of the shadow with the opacity slider, so you can tone it down here if you want to. Click OK. So that was the traditional way of applying a drop shadow, that is, using the drop shadow layer style effect. Let's try this on the counters and see what happens there. I'm going to locate the counters layer, which is down here. And I will hold down the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on the PC and drag the drop shadow, just the drop shadow, mind you, from this layer and drop it on counters. I'll expand counters, and you can see that it's there now. However, we have a problem. It doesn't appear. The reason we don't see it is because the drop shadow effect goes outside of the boundary of the counters themselves, and that is obscured by some of these layers above it. Namely, the floor layer is covering up all of the pixels where the drop shadow would appear. So what we need to do is select the counters layer and drag it up in the layer stack above the pattern layer. Now we can see the drop shadow. It's on top of the floor. So this type of procedure is typical and required when you're using drop shadows, because drop shadows by definition extend beyond the boundary of the pixels on that layer. So you have to start thinking of what's hiding it, what's obscuring it. And you often have to reorder your layers when you're dealing with drop shadows. Another problem that I perceive here on the counters layer is that we don't see the drop shadow here in front of the sink. And that's because there aren't very many pixels here in the counter where the sink is. It's very faint. And this isn't representing the reality of this counter. So this particular drop shadow effect isn't really working for us here. So I'm going to drag it into the trash and drop it there. So instead, I'm going to create a new layer above counters, and I'm going to create a rectangle as a shape layer, and I'm going to just sketch out a rough rectangle in the shape of this counter. So this layer becomes renamed Rectangle 2. And the next thing I will do is choose Combine Shapes so that I can draw additional rectangles on this layer. I'll draw another one over here, and another one for this counter, and finally another rectangle on this counter. So we have these black rectangles. I don't actually want to see any of the pixels on this layer. So I'm going to change the fill opacity to 0 by dragging to the left on that. So I don't see those rectangles. However, I can use the pixels on this layer to indicate where I want a layer effect to occur. So I can apply the drop shadow either by creating a new one or by copying the drop shadow that we've already made. I'll simply hold down the Option or Alt key and drag this drop shadow onto the Rectangle 2 layer. And now we have that appearing. I'll double click on this drop shadow effect and then drag it and reorient it so that I see some shadow from all of these counters. And I think that's a bit too dark or perhaps too far away from the counter. I'll tone that down a little bit by decreasing its opacity. Okay, so now we have more of an indication of the depth in this kitchen that's generated from these counters. However, if I do that, I now have the problem that now this range looks flat. So I'm going to have to copy this onto the range as well, or I could simply adjust this rectangle with the direct selection tool. I'll select it and then hold down the Shift key and select both of these points and then move them over so that we can have a drop shadow that includes the range as well. So in this video, you learned several techniques for creating drop shadows, both as layer style effects and as effects generated with zero fill using rectangles as the mechanism to indicate where you want the shadow to appear.